teaching Shakespeare and making it fun. Um, my final presentation for HDEV 301. Romeo, O Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt not be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. Romeo and Juliet. If we shadows have offended, think but this and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme, no more yielding, but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend, if you pardon, we will mend. Midsummer Night's Dream. Today I'm going to introduce you to a fascinating man in his world. His is a world that stood the test of time and has influenced more authors, actors, movies, teachers, students than I can even recall. William Shakespeare has influenced so many people the world over. His plays and sonnets are translated into multiple languages and have been read in multiple languages the world over for decades and decades and centuries. His works are only rivaled by one other book, the King James Bible. For my presentation on how to share and teach Shakespeare, I'll give you some background information on Shakespeare and his world, ideas on how to teach Shakespeare with your students, and ways to keep the knowledge flowing. Sharing Shakespeare. Shakespeare is one of the world's most well-known and well-received authors. Most students and adults know some sort of Shakespeare and have had some exposure to him, even if they don't realize it. Introducing Shakespeare and his life and times. One of the best ways that you can explain Shakespeare to your students is talking to them about his life, the time that he was present in Elizabethan England. You can also discuss with them the Globe Theatre, the theatre where most of Shakespeare's plays were performed, with the group The King's Men, that Shakespeare not only wrote for, but he was also an actor in. You can have the students create their own images of the Globe Theatre and what their ideas of who would be seated and where they would be seated. You can inform your students that Shakespeare was thought to be born on April 23rd, 1564, 3 days before he was baptized at Stratford-upon-Avon. Strangely enough, though, his death in 1616 also occurred on April 23rd. You can discuss with your students why Shakespeare has stood the test of time, why he is one of the most translated authors ever. His works have been translated into over 80 languages, from English to Spanish to French to Armenian, Italian, Bengali, Tagalog, even African nations, and languages like Uzbek and Creole, which are slave languages in Sierra Leone. You can discuss with your students the design of the Globe Theatre, why it was built as an open-air theatre. I find it fascinating that the cost to get into theatre was just 1 penny. And then to get up in levels, it was an additional penny. You can also explain to them that the name of groundling, or a groundling, which is, for those of you in Los Angeles and New York know that the Groundling Theater is a theater company. It's a comedic theater troupe. And that Groundling name was utilized or named for the people who would watch the theater on the ground floor. Each level of the theater was reserved for different types of people and different classes of people, yet the Queen would always have her spot. Whether or not she attended the theater, there was always a reserved space for her. You can also have your students create paper bag puppets and enact a day out in Elizabethan England. You can have them create costumes and draw on the puppets, or you could have your students utilize them to later on in the presentation, I'll discuss a way to utilize the paper puppets to act out scenes and act out portions of the play. A little bit of information: we owe over 500 plus words to William Shakespeare. He coined some of words and phrases that we still use today, like time-honored, besmirch, amazement, countless, useful, the word radiance, lackluster, and the phrase all in a day's work. Breaking Shakespeare down for your students is probably going to be one of the easiest and one of the most difficult things that you can do. The best way that I can recommend that you do it is break it down piece by piece, word by word, section by section, ensuring that your students understand what they're saying. Have them take certain phrases and pick out words that they know or words that sound similar to other words. The next slide will go over a section from A Midsummer Night's Dream. And in the book, How to Teach Your Children Shakespeare, author and playwright Ken Ligwood states that the easiest way to learn and understand Shakespeare is to start with small sections. And that imparting or informing your students that the most important thing and the easiest way to learn and retain Shakespeare is by understanding the words. For example, with A Midsummer Night's Dream, Mr. Ludwig says that you can use the verse on the next slide and have students repeat the sections in single lines until they know it inside and out. It's also easiest to have them start off with a section, and as I stated before, search out familiar words and search out pieces of information that make sense to them. The example here utilized is Oberon speaking in reference to the Fairy Queen, Titania. He says, "I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, where ox lips and the nodding violet grows, quite over canopied with luscious woodbine, with sweet musk roses." And it's a very descriptive passage, and he's talking about a section of the wood where he finds the Fairy Queen sleeping from time to time. And in this section of this forest is where he will put his potion that he has created with Puck and put this potion in her eyes so that she finds herself in love with one of the people in the play who has now had a donkey head attached to himself, and she will not realize that this is not his face, and she will inevitably fall in love with him, and this is his way of enacting some revenge on her. I can say that one of the best ways, if you can't tell, one of my favorite plays of Shakespeare is Midsummer Night's Dream. And one of the best ways to get your students really, really interested is to find a play that you really like and be enthusiastic about it. If your students find your enthusiasm interesting and they'll find your enthusiasm contagious, chances are that they'll be just as interested in it as you are. If it's something that you're not familiar with, read it over a couple of times. You might want to watch a film version of it. Familiarize yourself with certain elements and certain words and key lines. Tell the story of it to your students with excitement and passion. Sometimes it's simple as adding a costume or a prop so that they get excited about it and it creates a lasting impression. let them play, let them experiment with inflection and movement and interpretation. Ask them what they think is happening in the scene and why. The process, this process will allow them to be creative and allow them to use that creative portion of their brain, and allow them to figure out what it means for themselves and what it means, and allow them to get a good grasp on it. You can, if they get stuck in how they want to deliver their lines, you need to be the one who shows them how to do it. So if you speak it expressively, they're going to speak it expressively. If you want something simple as volume, if you're dealing with elementary school students, tell them to use their inside voices, or tell them to use their outside voices to gain more volume. What you can do, again, like I referenced before, is you can have them take their paper bag puppets and have them act out the scenes that they've chosen. Have them take a section from A Midsummer Night's Dream or Romeo and Juliet, or the play that you choose as the educator, the play that speaks to you the most and you think that your students will gain the most enjoyment from. Once you've picked the play, have them pick sections of it to learn and to be their own. Have them read it aloud to the class. Use their paper bag puppets and act it out. Or if you choose not to use the paper bag puppets, have them act it out on their own. Have them find a person in class who's using the same or similar passage or similar section of the play, and have them translate it together so that they can, you can make sure that everybody's on the same page, so that they can get in a group environment, so that they can work together to try and translate it and understand the play themselves. Once the students are done with it, you can, depending on how long you choose to have this experiment into Shakespeare go, whether it be weeks, a month, 2 months, the entire semester, whatever you choose.